Hello everyone, and welcome to Dimi Talks. Today I'll be discussing the OceanGate disaster. In case you hadn't kept up with the news, the OceanGate disaster refers to the fate of Titan, a submarine constructed and deployed by ocean exploration company OceanGate, with the goal of making tourist trips to the wreckage of the sunken cruise ship Titanic possible. On the 18th of June 2023, the Titan made its final descent, as approximately 2 hours into the trip, the submersible went missing. This provoked mass hysteria from global coastal authorities in a frantic search for the sub, as well as public outrage over how this could have been allowed to happen. Roughly a week later, as a hypothesized result of poor planning, short-sighted decisions and flawed design, the Titan was confirmed to have imploded. Almost no trace remained of its 5 crew members, including OceanGate CEO Stockton Rush. Today, I will cover an in-depth recap of what happened, who I believe was to blame, and if the tragedy really deserved so much media attention. Stick around until later to see what I mean by that. I'm Dimi, and without further ado, let's get into it. What happened? The scheduled descent mission to the Titanic would be the third to be undertaken by OceanGate's Titan, an experimental deep-sea submersible designed by the company with alleged contributions from Boeing, NASA, and the University of Washington. It was planned to be the only mission in 2023 because of the, quote, worst winter in Newfoundland in 40 years, unquote. In the days before the departure, the crew, who had been charged $250,000 each for their place on the submarine, attended numerous briefings about the descent. They were informed of the extreme cold, sub-zero Celsius, due to the immense depth, and advised to eat a low-residue diet closer to the dive time. The crew was composed of 5 people. Number 1 was Hamish Harding, a British billionaire, experienced astronaut and diver with 3 Guinness World Records, including the deepest dive of the Mariana Trench. Number 2 was Paul-Henri Nargeolet, a former French Navy commander and sometimes known as Titanic's greatest explorer for his expertise on the ship and his leading of 6 previous expeditions to the wreckage. Number 3 was Shahzada Dawood, a Britain-based Pakistani man who was a board member of the Prince's Trust charity. Aboard with him was his 19-year-old son, Suleiman Dawood, who was a university student in Glasgow. In a terrible twist of fate, the two were very close to missing the expedition after complications with their flight to St John's in Newfoundland. Finally, Number 5 was Stockton Rush, CEO of OceanGate and pilot of the Titan. Both an aeronautical and nautical enthusiast with flight training, a lengthy list of previous dives, and a master's degree in aerospace engineering, Rush had incredible confidence in his own abilities and those of his submarine. On Sunday, 18th June, at 8 AM Eastern Time, the Titan set off from its mothership, the Polar Prince, which is an ex-Canadian Coast Guard icebreaker. Approximately 105 minutes later, contact was lost between the Polar Prince and the Titan. When failing to resurface at the scheduled time, the mothership alerted the US Coast Guard. The following day, the situation escalated to a full-scale response from both US and Canadian coast forces. With no luck by Tuesday morning, the submersible's disappearance gained international attention, as well as aid from global powers such as France, who deployed their own submarine to aid in the search. Wednesday passed eventfully, as monitoring of anomalous underwater noise narrowed the search area down to a still enormous zone twice the size of Connecticut. On the morning of Thursday the 22nd, concerns were beginning to rise about whether the Titan would run out of air, should it be at the bottom of the ocean, and it was estimated that the craft contained 96 hours of oxygen from the time of sealing. The search turned critical following this, until the confirmed debris of the Titan was discovered 1,600 feet from the Titanic. It became clear at this point that a loud sound detected by the US Navy on Sunday marked the demise of the Titan and everyone aboard. Analysis of the wreckage, which has been collected and brought to shore, suggests that the submarine was somehow depressurized and instantly crushed by the massive pressure ratio. The implosion was so fast that it was unlikely that any of the crew had time to even register the event, although it was likely that they were aware of the danger, and so violent that experts are having difficulty identifying what is presumed to be human remains discovered within debris. Who was responsible? I believe the only person to be held accountable for this was OceanGate's CEO, Stockton Rush. Most, if not all, of the glaring issues with Titan's production, maintenance, and inevitable fate can be traced back to him. This is the obvious part. What I believe to be much more mysterious is his motive. Initially, I thought it was greed, in the light of the hefty 6-figure sum paid by each passenger, but it didn't add up. For one, OceanGate is identified first as an ocean exploration and research company, not instead branded as an extreme tourism operation. Which leads me to believe that the trips to the Titanic were more of a sort of statement to the world, as if he was bragging by taking wealthy individuals 12,500 feet underwater. Then it struck me how odd it was for Rush to have given his own life in pursuit of wealth. Either he was so dumbstruck by a vision of riches that he decided to chase it down into the ravenous depths, or it was an issue of ego. This view is much more consistent with his dismissive, dangerously optimistic, and carefree behaviour. By chance, I stumbled across an article by the BBC in 2022 about OceanGate. Quote from the article: Rush has had to create a new type of submersible made of lightweight materials that could take up to 5 people down from the ocean vessel to Titanic's depth. Many people thought it couldn't be done. It seems plausible that Rush used the short-time success of Titan and disproving of all of his critics as validation. From his previous achievements, being the youngest jet transport rated pilot in the world at the age of 19, we can assume Rush was very ambitious and eager to prove himself, and I believe this disaster was an extension of this egotism. Regardless of what caused Rush to be so headlong, he had a direct influence over numerous crucial factors which led to the implosion of Titan. Design flaws of Titan. One of the most immediate and glaring criticisms of the Titan following its disappearance was on the topic of its crude design. This includes the controversial use of a gaming controller, specifically a Logitech F710, which is a decade-old design. However, this is by far not the main offender, of which there are frighteningly many. Firstly, let's discuss the use of carbon fibre for the hull. Fitting with its quote-unquote experimental theme, the Titan was the first ever submersible to have a body primarily constructed of only carbon fibre. Being the first to do something, in my opinion, is never a good thing for whoever is concerned, and the expert professor in physics Aaron Bansell agrees with this view. Quote, the ability of carbon fibres to withstand repeated cycles of stress, especially compressive stress under deep sea pressures, is not well understood, making it difficult to design safe hulls based on carbon fibres, unquote. But never fear, Rush's professional design team of university interns have come up with a method to counter this issue of safety. Introducing the Titan's acoustic emission sensors, which sample sound waves through the hull to detect faults caused by the repetitive expansions and retractions of the sub's missions. This is actually a very good idea, especially for a craft designed to make frequent descents to a staggering depth of nearly 4,000 metres down. For context, an average submarine dives only 400 to 500 metres. However, it was clearly flawed. OceanGate stated in 2020 that the system was a key safety system of Titan and that the submarine would not be deployed if it were not functioning. Yet, the fault that undoubtedly caused the explosion was not detected prior to the dive, as surely some eyebrows would have been raised and the mission would have been called off. This leaves us with 3 possibilities. The first is that Titan suffered an impact with something that caused it to be depressurized, which is incredibly unlikely as it exploded in open water. The second is that OceanGate were cutting corners and ignored the warnings. While I wouldn't put it past Rush, the third possibility is much more plausible. The system simply did not work. You may be wondering where Rush falls into this. The answer is that he greenlit all of these retrospectively moronic design features and, in fact, supported them. He stated that it was designed to be, quote, low-tech, unquote, with an interior featuring a single power button, 2 monitors, and the infamous controller. Perhaps this tragedy could have been averted if he had treated the business more like what it was and less like maintenance of a fairground ride. Verbal warnings from the industry. It's not like Rush was naive. He had received countless warnings from nautical enthusiasts, industry experts, and even from within his own company. For example, David Lockridge, the former director of marine operations, was sacked after identifying a worrying amount of issues with the Titan during a risk assessment. Ignoring your employees as the CEO is one thing, but when you ignore a letter signed by over 30 industry experts from the DNV-GL, a widely respected certification organisation, stating that your submarine breaks safety guidelines, you're inviting trouble, whether in the form of an intervention or an accident. In the following email from spearheading member and ex-OceanGate employee Rob McCallum, Rush is claimed to be mirroring the Titanic's famous catch cry, "She is unsinkable." Rush responded to this by calling it a serious personal insult, which supports my theory about Titan being a way to feed his ego. McCallum tried hopelessly to dissuade him, however, OceanGate threatened legal action should he continue. Rush had purposefully avoided certification of his submersible as he believed that organisations such as the DNV are the old guard of the industry who attempt to hinder innovation. He was able to bypass marine regulations because their operations were in international waters, thereby exempting them from any country's law. Personally, I'm an advocate for innovation, and I think those who put their lives on the line in the name of technology are truly heroes. But endangering the lives of those who have been told that the experiment, and I call it that because that's what it is completely safe, is a step too far. Rush should have performed plenty more test dives before offering tours of the Titanic to the public. Somebody else who also thought Titan required more testing was a fellow diving expedition company owner, nautical enthusiast, and close friend of Rush's, Carl Stanley. In 2019, Stanley was taken on a test drive in the Bahamas and later conferenced with Rush over email. These emails are very interesting, as they begin with Stanley making a note of a large crackling sound he heard at around 12,000 feet down on the dive. If we look at the leaked transcript between the Polar Prince and Titan, we can see at 9:38 AM, Rush describes a similar crackling sound at roughly the same depth. This transcript is not confirmed to be real, however, if it is, we can clearly see that there was a preliminary warning of the catastrophe 3 years prior. Had Rush simply paid better attention to such an unnerving sound to be heard while so far underneath the sea, the submarine may have never imploded. In my opinion, this was one of Rush's most foolish and impacting mistakes, ignoring such a blatant warning of what was to come. Previous dives. The third and final topic I would like to cover is the most concerning. I'm not entirely sure how the disaster was even allowed to occur when so many prior dives either experienced major issues, were aborted, or had to be rescheduled because of errors. An absolutely stunning statistic is that only 15% of all dives undertaken by Titan ever reached the Titanic. With such a low success rate on test missions, you would expect them to wait before carrying out crewed missions, which people actually paid for. Yet they happened anyway, and as a surprise to nobody, suffered frightening errors. One such doomed dive was a mission to the Titanic in 2021. Piloted once again by Rush, the submersible was host to a small crew, which included videographer Jaden Pan, who recounted the event after. When almost at the ocean floor, Rush abruptly announced to the passengers that they would need to ascend to the surface. Allegedly, he stated that the battery had gone kaput, and there was trouble detaching the sub's ballast. He offered the crew to sleep, as it would have taken at least 24 hours for the weights to dissolve. Imagine yourself in the shoes of one of those passengers for a moment. You have paid the man in front of you $250,000 to go to sleep at the bottom of a freezing ocean. Wouldn't you be outraged? It's not as if this was a one-off occasion. Just a year later, in 2022, another serious malfunction occurred during a tourist dive. While it is true this dive did reach its destination, it certainly wasn't in the intended way. Just 300 meters from the Titanic, Titan began to spin in circles uncontrollably as pilot Scott Griffith gravely reported an issue with the thrusters. Reportedly, a passenger scientist aboard conversated with the pilot about the issue and pointed out to him that the thrusters should be unidirectional, contradicting Griffith's claim that the reason for the issue was that the maintenance crew had swapped out the thrusters. In all fairness to Griffith, driving a submarine with a PlayStation controller is surely a challenge. However, it shows that he is unfamiliar with the engineering of his craft, which I believe makes Rush even more accountable for an incident like this for permitting him to pilot in the first place. I think you'll agree that Titan has quite an unnerving catalogue of failed dives, and if you dig even just a little, more spring to the surface. There are plenty of other examples I can cite, but I think I've made my point. What more can I say? If you ignore so many stop signs, you're bound to fly off the road and into a deep, deep canyon. And to say Rush was just the driver of this car is a royal understatement. He designed it, unsuccessfully test drove it, and even invited other people to join him on his one-way journey. What an incredibly tragic waste of talent. Why did the Titan get so much attention? Here's a fun fact. Humanity knows less about the sea than it does about space. That's right, we know even more about objects that are billions of light years away that we can never even fathom reaching than we do about Big Blue that many live next to and even on. I would argue on top of this that sea is more dangerous than space. Yes, in space there's a vacuum, but no hellish terrain that has fueled thousands of years of shipwreck stories, including the Titanic itself, or crushing pressure so violent that it can compact any poorly prepared man into a tiny ball of mush. But don't just take my word for it. Statistics speak volumes. The International Labour Organization believe that up to 24,000 fishermen around the world die at sea yearly. In 2019, there were just under 1,100 sea accidents, including fatalities, in UK waters alone. And those who run the website wrecksite.eu have helped expose a terrifying reality to the rest of the world, that there are 209,940 located shipwrecks worldwide, with estimations in the hundred thousands of ones that still lay undiscovered. I don't mean to downplay the tragic events of the Titan disaster, but with so many others suffering accidents at the cruel hands of the sea, why do we care so much about this one specific incident? The answer is that this comparatively small maritime accident is much more intertwined with the Western world than many of the others. Rush was an important character in deep sea exploration, as proved by the multiple documentaries that have been produced following his work. Meanwhile, many of the aforementioned fishing accidents occur in third world countries with little to no regulations on labour, leading to workers being untrained and unaware of the risks of working on a boat, as well as working in poor conditions on shoddy ships and on merciless hours. In some countries, forced labour is still legal aboard fishing vessels, yet we never hear about any of this injustice. A very similar accident which received relatively small press coverage was a 2022 diving incident in Trinidad and Tobago, in which 5 divers were sucked into a tight oil pipeline due to a pressure imbalance, leading to the deaths of 4. Allegedly, when sole survivor Christopher Boudram surfaced after an agonising struggle, his pleas to save his colleagues were ignored as he was transported to the hospital. That's a wildly different attitude towards rescue than the globally endorsed search party received by the Titan, even though the same amount of lives were at risk and we actually knew the location of the divers, in contrast to the disappearance of the submarine. So why am I telling you this? In a short and morbid way, I mean to say that the Titan disaster was a necessary event in the progression of safety at sea. That sounds outrageous, but think about it. The event brought the public eye to what happens when maritime rules and regulations are not enforced strictly enough, resulting in disaster, which might be enough to drive change in a worldwide sea safety revolution. By raising awareness, the Titan disaster has made a spark in what could ignite into campaigns against unfair treatment at sea. Unknowingly, the sacrifice of 5 brave explorers descending into the Atlantic unknown could end up saving the lives and well-beings of tens, perhaps even hundreds of thousands. For that, I salute their courage and wish them peace now that they have left this world. My name is Dimi, and this has been Dimi Talks. Thank you for watching.